You've been told that moments like this are scripted, that on live TV, every word, every gesture, every glance is rehearsed. But that night, it wasn't. That night, in a room so bright it felt like daylight poured through the ceiling, the cameras caught something raw, a collision between faith, power, and the kind of silence that can break a person if they don't know how to wield it. When Ivanka Trump turned toward Jasmine Crockett, she didn't just ask a question. She set a trap. Not with shouting, not with insults, but with that slow, deliberate delivery of someone who has learned that power doesn't always raise its voice. Her words slid across the table like glass, cool and sharp. How does your brand of religion fit with the things you stand for politically? Seems like a contradiction, don't you think? The air didn't shift immediately. The audience didn't gasp. Instead, the silence thickened. The silence thickened. The kind of silence where every thought is loud, where you can feel 100 people deciding in real time whether to lean in or look away. Behind the cameras, crew members exchanged quick glances. The host froze mid-smile. The other panelists found their notes fascinating, all of a sudden. You have to understand, in politics, faith is sacred ground. Not because it's pure, but because it's dangerous. It's one of the last things people will defend even when everything else crumbles. And Ivanka had just stepped directly onto it in front of millions. Jasmine didn't flinch. Thin. That's the part no one talks about. She didn't rush to defend herself. She didn't fire back with a clever line. She let the silence grow, feeding it, until the cameras themselves seemed to lean closer. Her hands stayed flat on the table, fingertips pressing into the wood, eyes locked on her challenger. No anger, no fear, just stillness. The kind of stillness that makes the other person start to wonder if they've just made a mistake. And in that moment, every person watching, in the studio, at home, across the endless stream of screens, could feel it. This wasn't going to be the kind of exchange you forget when the next commercial plays. This was about to become a moment people would replay for years, trying to figure out how one woman turned a challenge into something far more dangerous. Most people, when cornered like that, react on instinct. They defend, they explain, they scramble to prove themselves worthy under someone else's definition. That's the trap. You start answering the question, and before you know it, you've accepted the premise. You've already lost. Jasmine knew better. She'd been here before, not on this stage, not with this many eyes, but in rooms where the stakes were higher because there were no cameras to keep people polite. Rooms where questions weren't just questions. They were knives wrapped in velvet. Bedin velvet. She leaned forward slightly, not to shrink the distance, but to claim it. Her voice, when it came, didn't rise. It didn't waver. It landed with that rare kind of steadiness that makes people put down their phones and listen. You're asking me if my beliefs and my politics can exist in the same place? She said slowly, letting each word settle before releasing the next. I think the better question is why anyone would assume they can't. The audience didn't erupt. Not yet. Didn't erupt. Not yet. But there was a sound, a low ripple, the collective exhale of people realizing they were hearing something unscripted. In a culture obsessed with the performance of faith, she wasn't performing. She was defining. Jasmine's gaze stayed locked on Ivanka, but her words started drifting past her, toward the audience, toward the people at home who'd been told all their lives that belief has a dress code, a party line, a checklist. My faith isn't a slogan. It isn't a talking point. And it's not a prop you pull out when the cameras are rolling, she continued. It's how I treat people when there's nothing to gain from it. It's whether I stand up for someone being pushed down. It's how I speak when the person across from me doesn't look like me, vote like me, or pray like me, or pray like me. That was when the first wave of applause started. Hesitant, scattered, but real. And you could feel the control room hesitate. Should they cut to commercial? Or keep rolling? Because everyone could tell they were watching something electric. The kind of exchange you can't manufacture. The kind that reveals more about both people than either intended. And as the clapping grew louder, Ivanka leaned forward, the practiced calm still on her face, but her eyes telling another story. She was about to push back. She didn't know yet. Jasmine wasn't done. Ivanka's voice came back into the space like the strike of a match. Quick, precise, meant to reframe before the flames got out of hand. I wasn't implying. She began, her tone still wrapped in that polished civility that plays well on television. But Jasmine cut in before the sentence could even find its footing. Not loud, not rushed, just certain. Yes, you were. It wasn't an accusation thrown like a stone. No, it was the kind of statement you make when you've already done the math, when you've read every word in someone's subtext and decided you won't pretend you haven't. The audience stilled again. No one wanted to miss what came next. You were implying that belief is only real if it's wrapped in the same political packaging as yours, she continued. And if I don't meet that checklist, my faith doesn't count. That's the part I can't let slide. Her words weren't crafted for applause lines, and maybe that's why they landed harder. This wasn't the reflexive point scoring of a political sparring match. This was a mirror tilted just enough to make everyone wonder what they'd see if it was turned toward them. From the corner of the room, a camera operator, someone who'd probably filmed 100 debates just like this, shifted slightly, their lens locked in. The host's eyes darted between the two women, calculating whether to step in or let the tension breathe. And in the control booth, someone made a silent decision. Keep rolling. Jasmine turned toward the audience now, scanning faces as if she could speak to them one at a time. Belief is not about how loudly you can say it on TV. It's about whether your actions match the values you claim to hold. Say. Everything else, she paused, long enough for people to lean forward without realizing it, is theater. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It wasn't staged. It had that rare, almost physical weight, the kind that says I recognize truth when I hear it. And I'm not going to pretend I don't. And that's when the power in the room shifted. You could see it in the panelists' posture, in the way the host's voice caught before his next sentence, even in Ivanka's stillness. The challenge she'd set had been returned and amplified. To understand why this moment hit with such force, you have to rewind. Because what millions saw on TV was just the spark. The explosion was built long before the cameras started rolling. That morning had begun like any other media day for Jasmine Crockett. Early alarm, black coffee, a quick scan of her talking points in the back of a car, weaving through Dallas traffic. She'd been booked for a policy roundtable. Education reform, economic growth. Standard stuff. Nothing that hinted at the kind of personal strike that was coming. The studio itself was a strange paradox. On TV, it looked warm, inviting, almost casual. In reality, it was cold. The kind of cold that seeps into your fingertips. Bright spotlights overhead threw a glossy sheen across every surface, so the set looked perfect on camera. And artificial to anyone who'd ever stood under those lights. Jasmine took her seat at the far left of the curved panel table. Across from her, 2 panelists away, sat Ivanka Trump, her posture perfect, her expression calm in that way that suggests every movement is calculated. Even in the chaos backstage, assistants darting in and out, makeup artists sweeping in for last-minute touch-ups, Ivanka had seemed untouched, speaking to her aides in low, measured tones. For the first 20 minutes, it was civil. Predictable. Jasmine spoke about the parents she'd met in San Antonio who worked double shifts just to send their kids to safe schools. She painted pictures of small-town business owners struggling to hire because local graduates didn't have the right training. Real people. Real stakes. Ivanka responded with her signature smoothness, private sector partnerships, innovation in school models. Polished, rehearsed, every sentence a clean soundbite. But there were signs, small ones, that the collision was coming. See, each time Jasmine spoke, Ivanka's eyes lingered just a fraction too long, as if studying her for weak spots. Once, she tilted her head slightly, the kind of micro-gesture that could be either curiosity or quiet judgment. Then the host, in what he must have thought was a neutral move, shifted the conversation toward how personal values shape public decision-making. Harmless on the surface, except Jasmine's answer reached deeper than policy. She spoke without grandstanding about how her faith informed not her legislation, but her integrity. That's when Ivanka's attention sharpened. The cameras didn't catch it, but in the room, you could feel the temperature drop. The panelists sensed it. The crew sensed it. The crew sensed it. Something was about to break. The audience leaned forward, their faces a mix of disbelief and fascination. What Melania had just said wasn't simply a personal story. It was an unmasking, a calculated tearing down of a carefully engineered illusion. She spoke of private dinners where decisions that affected millions were made not in the Oval Office, but in whispered conversations over imported wine. She described watching foreign leaders' expressions change, not because of policy, but because of the private assurances given behind closed doors, assurances that directly contradicted the public promises. Every word she spoke seemed to shake the room's foundations. You could feel the air tighten as if the very oxygen was being rationed. The moderators glanced at each other with the panic of people realizing they just lost control of their own show. The cameras kept rolling, but the production crew looked frozen, unsure if they were capturing history or sealing their own professional graves. Then Melania shifted her tone, no longer the cold elegance people associated with her, but something sharper, steel under silk. She began describing the psychological games, the quiet punishments, the invisible walls built between allies and enemies. She didn't use names in this part, but the patterns she painted were unmistakable to anyone who'd been paying attention. She spoke of reputations crushed not by scandal, but by quiet whispers and deliberate isolation. She described the vault, not a physical place, but a system where damaging information was collected and stored, ready to be deployed at the right moment to ensure obedience. Some in the crowd laughed nervously, as if this was all just political theater. But others sat motionless, their eyes locked on her, realizing she was describing something they'd always suspected, but never dared say aloud. And then, without warning, she turned the spotlight directly on one of her critics, seated just a few feet away. She recited, with unsettling precision, a chain of events that lined up perfectly with a major political shift last year, events that had seemed random at the time, but now fit together like a trap snapping shut. The critic tried to interject to deny, but Melania's voice drowned them out, not by shouting, but with the kind of controlled calm that made every word sound like a final judgment. There was no going back now. The room knew it, the audience knew it, and most importantly, so did the people watching at home. The studio lights seemed suddenly hotter, harsher, as if the room itself wanted to expose every hidden twitch and bead of sweat. Melania took a sip of water, not because she needed it, but because she knew the pause would work like a blade against her opponent's nerves. When she spoke again, her voice dropped, not in volume, but in weight. She began to recount the night she realized the power structure wasn't about politics at all, but about leverage. She painted the scene with such vivid detail that the viewers could almost smell the polished mahogany of the room, hear the faint hum of the hidden recording equipment, feel the unspoken threat that hung over every smile. She described sitting silently in a corner while men in tailored suits discussed the future of entire nations like they were poker chips. She said she learned quickly that in that world, loyalty wasn't earned. It was bought, traded, and discarded as soon as it became inconvenient. Every handshake was a contract, and every contract came with a hidden clause. Her words were a scalpel, peeling back the skin of political civility to reveal the raw machinery underneath. A few in the audience shifted uncomfortably, but no one looked away. Then she revealed the moment that changed her role entirely. A sealed envelope handed to her at a gala, under the guise of a simple thank you note. Inside were photographs, documents, and names that could ruin careers in minutes. She didn't say how she'd used them, only that after that night, certain people who had once dismissed her as ornamental began to treat her with a kind of quiet fear. It was not respect, it was survival, and she made it clear that the same survival instinct was still very much in play. The camera cut briefly to her opponent, whose smile was now tight, almost brittle. Melania noticed, and without breaking eye contact, delivered her next line with deliberate precision. When you've seen the way the game is truly played, you stop caring about the applause and start caring about who's holding the knife. The audience erupted, not in applause, but in a low, rolling murmur that felt like the sound of a tide pulling out before a storm. Everyone knew something bigger was coming. She leaned forward now, elbows on the table, eyes locked like a hawk sizing up prey. The moderator tried to interject, but Melania's voice cut clean through the studio, smoother than silk but sharper than glass. She began recounting a story that at first sounded almost trivial, a dinner invitation from a friend of a friend in Washington. But as she layered in details, the guarded townhouse entrance, the subtle exchange of phones for security purposes, the way the dinner table was set for 13 instead of 12, the tone shifted. Viewers could sense it wasn't a simple social call. She described how every guest at that table had influence, a senator who controlled key committees, a billionaire whose funding could make or break campaigns, a media executive whose reach spanned continents. The conversation that night danced around pleasantries, but Melania had trained herself to hear the code beneath the words. When they talked about a shifts in investment strategy, they meant pulling funding from certain allies. When they mentioned adjusting public sentiment, they meant weaponizing headlines. Then she revealed the part that made the studio's air grow heavy. One of the guests, calm, smiling, sipping wine, slid her a small black notebook. Inside were not just names, but entire webs of connections. Who owed favors, who had dirt on whom, and who could be pushed out if they became inconvenient. And at the very center of that web, a name everyone watching would recognize. She didn't say it yet, but the way her eyes glinted told the audience she could and would if pushed. Her opponent tried to laugh it off, dismissing it as a dramatic storytelling, but Melania didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned back, almost relaxed, and delivered the kind of line that felt like it could echo through history. I learned that the real seat of power is not the one you're elected to. It's the one where you're invited to dinner, and you leave knowing everyone else's secrets. The crowd shifted again, whispers rising like static in the air. The opponent's smile faltered for the first time, and the cameras caught it, proof enough that whatever Melania had in that notebook wasn't fiction. And for the first time that night, it wasn't just her words that had people on edge. It was the question of how much more she was willing to reveal. The silence after her last words didn't just hang, it pressed down, thick and suffocating. Every camera in the room seemed to inch closer, every microphone leaning toward her as if desperate to catch the next breath. Then, with an almost careless grace, she reached into a bag and pulled out the same small black notebook. Gasps rippled through the audience, not because of the notebook itself, but because the cameras caught the initials embossed on the cover in gold. They weren't hers. They weren't her. They belonged to someone with a seat at the highest table in government. Her opponent tried to speak, but Melania simply opened the book, flipping through pages so casually it looked like she was skimming a magazine. "Oh, do you know," she began softly, "how much a person will say when they believe no one will remember?" She tapped a page. This was a conversation over dessert, a senator explaining which votes could be bought and which could be broken. Another page turn. This one. A media deal agreed upon before the story ever reached the newsroom. The moderator's voice trembled as they asked if she intended to share the contents. Melania didn't answer directly. Instead, she closed the book slowly, her fingertips lingering on the cover as if sealing a vault. "Information," she said, her accent wrapping around the word like silk on steel, "is only valuable when you know exactly when to spend it." The crowd shifted again. But this time, it wasn't restlessness. It was the awareness that something irreversible had just happened. Her opponent's eyes darted between the notebook and the cameras, calculating the cost of denying her story. The calculation didn't look promising. Then Melania leaned forward, locking her gaze not on the opponent, not on the moderator, but straight into the camera lens. "I'll go. Me was quiet for years because I believed silence could protect me. But I've learned silence only protects them." The words landed like thunder, and for a moment, even the camera seemed to hesitate before cutting to a commercial break. Viewers across the country were left staring at their screens, wondering what she had, who she'd name next, and whether they were witnessing the opening move in a game far bigger than anyone realized. When the cameras returned, the energy in the room had shifted from tense to electric. Every journalist leaned forward, eyes sharp, fingers hovering above keyboards. Somewhere in the control room, a producer whispered to the host through an earpiece, "If she names one, we stay live, no matter what." Melania didn't rush so good. She adjusted her microphone, smoothed the edge of her sleeve, and let the anticipation swell until the air felt ready to snap. "You want names?" she asked, her voice carrying a dangerous calm. Fine. Let's start with the ones who thought I wouldn't dare." The first name, she said, hit like a gunshot. A sitting senator, one who built his career on a family values, suddenly found his private flights, hidden from the public ledger, dragged into the light. Melania didn't just say his name. She recited dates, destinations, even the company that filed the false expense reports. Gasps erupted from the audience, while the senator's face appeared on the split screen, pale and tight-lipped. Before the echo faded, she dropped the next name, a media executive whose network had buried stories for her donors in exchange for offshore favors. She listed the Shell Corporation. Every name she spoke was followed by a short, surgical strike of detail. Just enough to prove she knew more than anyone had guessed, but not enough to reveal her entire hand. The opponent across from her had stopped blinking altogether, their grip on the desk white-knuckled. Fridden. The moderator, now visibly sweating, tried to interrupt. "We can't verify, but Melania cut them off with a single raised hand. A verification is coming," she said. "And when it does, remember who warned you first." It wasn't rage in her tone. It was certainty. It was certainty. The kind of certainty that comes from holding a hand so strong, no bluff is necessary. Then she paused, letting the silence return, before delivering one last warning to the entire room. "Every name I haven't spoken yet should not sleep tonight." The camera caught it all. The cold glint in her eyes, the calculated poise, the way she stood from her chair without waiting for permission. The audience knew she wasn't finished. She had only just drawn the first drop of blood. She didn't walk out. Not yet. Instead, Melania stepped toward the front of the stage, closing the space between herself and the cameras until her face filled the frame. The house lights dimmed slightly, the shadows sharpening her expression into something almost sculpted. The audience was silent, waiting for the next detonation. "You think this is about politics?" she began, her voice low but steady. "It's not. This is about power. And the people who've been feeding on your trust for decades." She didn't name names this time. Not because she couldn't, but because she understood the potency of fear left to bloom in the mind. She painted a picture instead. One of lavish banquets behind guarded gates, while families rationed groceries, of secret meetings where laws were shaped not in Congress, but in boardrooms, of entire narratives scripted in advance, fed to the public as truth, while the real story rotted in vaults. Her words didn't accuse one person, they accused an entire system, and in doing so, they made everyone watching feel like they had just stepped inside the forbidden room. Then she leaned closer, as though she was speaking to each viewer individually. "You are the jury now. You get to decide if these people keep their crowns, or if you take them away." The control room was chaos, directors whispering about legal risks, producers debating if they could even stay on the air. But the ratings counter in the corner of the screen was climbing like a rocket. The country wasn't just watching, they were riveted, waiting to see how far she would go. Melania straightened, her presence filling the room. "In the days ahead, you'll hear them call me a liar, unstable, vindictive. They will flood you with distractions." But when you strip away their noise, remember one thing: every accusation I've made comes with proof, and when it lands, their world ends. The final moment was pure theater. She removed a small, leather-bound folder from her bag and placed it on the moderator's desk. "This," she said, "is just the first chapter, and I haven't even opened the real book yet." She turned and walked off stage. No music, no applause. Just the weight of what she'd unleashed hanging in the air like the moment before a storm breaks, leaving the nation with the terrible certainty that nothing, after tonight, would ever be the same.